Joining us live in the studio is Labor MP Ed Husic. Ed, thank you for your time. Now, Peter Dutton was on this morning and he said a few things that have piqued your interest. Firstly, it's interesting, the stoush with the New Zealand government. You can't expect a lot of sympathy from Australians about wanting to keep people who aren't Australian citizens in the country after they've been committed of serious crimes.
Sure, but you'd expect consistency out of the government. I mean, they're telling one ally, take your crims back, but they're telling another ally who's saying the same thing to us, not interested. I mean, how many people have we got sitting in Syrian jails right now, crims and terrorists in Syrian jails, that the US has said, you've got to take these people back, and the Australian government said no, but we're telling the New Zealanders to take theirs back.
Isn't there an issue with actual extraction of those people you're talking about in Syria? And we don't have the intelligence. It's not like we can trust their systems like we can New Zealand.
I think a number of things. One is the government's been inconsistent on this. They have stuffed around on de-radicalisation and not got programs that work. And either the people that get brought back are going to be de-radicalised or sit in a jail until they are, and they pose no threat to the country. And the other thing is too, no one's explained to us how they got out of the country in the first place when the coalition bragged that no one would leave to go and fight in a foreign theatre of war initially. So there's a whole lot of questions there that the coalition's got to answer. And we've got people sitting in facilities in that part of the world where it's questionable how strong those standards are and whether or not they find their way out and cause another terrible act. I mean, you've got to be consistent on this stuff. And that's my issue in terms of what he said with Jacinda Ardern on the weekend, or on Friday, in an event where we saw one leader that, we saw two people, one leader who's got a proven track record in dealing with adversity, and the other was Scott Morrison.
We do know that Jacinda Ardern's staring down another election. Her popularity personally is quite poor in New Zealand. She's really copped a lot of heat for promising all the social housing that she hasn't delivered on. So do you accept that there may be a bit of grandstanding in her position?
Oh, well, it's amazing that a government that's become the sort of the key exponents of grandstanding and marketing are trying to call other people out for the same thing. I mean, a lot of the government's announcements are all marketing spin and gumph with not much real substance to them at any rate, and they're going off, trying to point the finger at Jacinda Ardern. My bigger issue is we've got to be consistent with our allies. We've got to deal seriously with these issues that present in terms of threats to national safety, and I just don't think someone like Peter Dutton, who isn't being consistent on this case, should be let to get away or allowed to get away with those type of statements.
You're concerned too that he hasn't been strong enough in his rhetoric about right-wing extremism after the speech from Mike Burgess, head of ASIO, last week, in which he highlighted it as an issue. We have heard Peter Dutton say that it is a serious concern, that there are resources being dedicated to it and that they've been on it for quite some time. What in his language isn't satisfying you?
Well, look at the evidence. I mean, how many groups are they prescribed? We've got allies that are prescribed, even in the last week, in the UK, they've prescribed some of these groups. They've done none here. What have the measures been in terms of countering violent extremism or de-radicalisation? How much money?
If the threat is, as ASIO says, though...
I understand, but just let me finish this point. We spend more on government advertising than we do on countering violent extremism. It's about roughly, $2 million a year. It's laughable, the amount that's been dedicated. So I just don't think that the proof, the evidence, the stats doesn't back up what they're saying. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I was interrupting you. But if, as Mike Burgess was saying, there are risks that it's more lone wolf type situations with right-wing extremists. So how would you prescribe that as an organisation?
But there are still other organisations that are creating the climate, putting out the rhetoric, encouraging people to become radicalised, either online or elsewhere. I mean, the first time we've heard that there are groups that are saluting swastikas, engaged in weapons collection and training routines as well. That's the first time we've heard of it. Where's that been in the last 12 months? And my view is that if there are other allies of ours, like the US, that are taking this seriously, we've been slow to pick up on this, and I just don't buy that this has been receiving serious enough attention. And in the course of the last 12 months, where we have had, tragically, one of our own go and commit a terrible act that has then inspired acts in the US, like, for example, in El Paso, and then we've seen what's happened in Germany in the last couple of weeks.
Now, if we can move on to, we had Anthony Albanese out this morning talking about the bushfire response, in particular saying that not enough of the small business loans have been approved. This is at a state government level, though. The federal government puts the money towards it, and then it's up to the state government to administer it. So why is he out attacking federal government?
Well, two things I'd say is the first is that the New South Wales government has also raised its eyebrows about the rate of support that's being provided. They've managed to push 31 million out the door, while at the federal level only 1 million, and they're rightly asking why. And I think that is a legitimate question that should be asked. There are businesses that are in need, people that are communities that are expecting assistance, and they want to see a clean-up happen or occur much quicker than it is. Anthony Albanese today, also rightly suggested that we provide wage assistance schemes to businesses that are either directly or indirectly affected, similar to the schemes that were in place post-Cyclone Yazi. We've put that on the table and said to the government that they should consider extending that type of support to speed up the recovery on the ground and ensure that communities get back on their feet. Again, all we see out of the government is spin, marketing, announcements, claims, but very little evidence on the ground to show that stuff is happening.
One thing that is happening today has been this plastics announcement from the Prime Minister. He's had a number of really big businesses in Australia, McDonald's, Nestle, on board saying they're reducing their plastics, a plan to use government procurement contracts to have a specific focus on reducing plastics in the environment. Is this a bipartisan issue?
I think, look, if we're making headway on these issues, absolutely. But the government doesn't extend bipartisan support on these type of things where it can make a difference. I mean, we're nearly 12 months to the day that Labor released a policy on electric vehicles that talked about using government procurement to boost electric vehicle sales, using tax concessions to help private fleets embrace the greater use of electric vehicles, and seeing 50% of new vehicles in Australia by 2030 be electric. And what did the government do? They went out and ran around like headless chooks saying that we'd see the end of tradies and their utes. So it's got to run both ways. And let's see if this actually works. I mean, the reality is a lot of the recyclable material that used to be accepted by other countries for processing isn't. It's causing a big concern on the ground. What have we got out of the federal government? We got, 100 million out of the Clean Energy Financing Corporation to provide as debt and equity to states and territories that might do processing on the ground here. Victoria last week announced 300 million to basically do a much more comprehensive approach, and the feds are completely missing in action. And we talk about big business. There are big businesses right now, like Microsoft, in the last just this year, has said they don't only want to be carbon neutral, they want to be carbon negative, and by 2050 remove all the carbon that they pumped out, the emissions they pumped out since they first started in 1975. So there are some big companies taking big steps, and this government wants to make a lot out of some smaller level announcements when really we need to see serious action on climate change rather than a marketing plan.
Doesn't that sound a bit like spin, though, from these companies to say you're going to do so much to reduce carbon in the atmosphere that you're going to negative out everything? I mean, is that really possible? They're not like wind farm manufacturers. We're talking about computer retailers, and they use more minerals than anyone in making that kind of technology.
I would make this point, Annalise. A lot of these companies have to do more. I mean, you're right to call out some of these companies. Microsoft and Amazon run massive cloud computing projects or operations that use a hell of a lot of energy, and they've got to offset it. And Amazon's come under pressure internally from its own employees to do more. Microsoft announced $1 billion over 4 years for an innovation fund to basically invest in new technology. They reckon they might make some headway on carbon capture. Let's wait and see, but on forests, solar and other forms of renewable as well. So they're putting their money where their mouth is. The key will be for other less profitable companies, how they make inroads in this space. And it comes back to the point, you need government leadership on this. I mean, Angus Taylor talking about a tech solution, that bloke couldn't even get tech solutions for government when he was the Digital Transformation Minister. Well, we had a dozen or so projects go off the rails, and now he reckons he's going to find a way for business to use tech to reduce emissions. I mean, go by his record rather than the spin.
I'd say those are different industries, but we've run out of time. Ed Husic, thank you for your time joining us live in the studio.